Behind the net, the Sanderson. Orr! Bobby Orr! Orr to the Boston Bruins! Willie Mays just brought him drawn to his feet. This was the truth. This was the big difference. Hold it, hold it. I'm running. Hold it, you're not that quick. Come on, man. Let's shoot up the wall. Reggie Jackson is in his third home run of the game. That head's cut out of the air. The ball is pulled in by Franco Henry.
Hello, I'm Chris Fowler for Sports Century. In February of 2001, the man they called the Intimidator was killed in the Daytona 500, leaving a void a mile wide in auto racing. Dale Earnhardt ruled his world with an explosive blend of guts and guile. To win a race, he'd scare the competition out of its skin, then make it all right with a wink and a smile.
Dale was one of the toughest race drivers that ever lived. It'd be hard to castrate him with a chainsaw.
Wow, and Earnhardt splits them.
They went 3 abreast into one. You don't do that.
He would pass 2 wide and 3 wide, and it's like, how does he do that?
Earnhardt, here we go. He's got him on the inside of turn 6.
Look here, boy. That hole wasn't big enough.
And Earnhardt loses it, goes on the grass, comes back, and Earnhardt still got the lead. Incredible. He come up there and tried to spin me out twice. I didn't take it.
He didn't worry about the nest. He just manhandled the car.
We lost the power steering. He's driving it now with just a straight steering box.
It's just like Friday night at the old dirt track. They're bumping and carrying on.
The faster he could go, the better he seemed to enjoy it.
Here comes Earnhardt. How did he get through all these cars? And Earnhardt is going for the lead.
He literally had no fear.
If you went up and bumped him, he'd say that's once. Then when you went by him, he'd hit you twice.
He's smiling and spinning, hitting the wall. Earnhardt survives, but Bodine and Schrader both go to the infield in a spin.
There was just a certain ominous presence when you looked in the mirror and all you could see was the top of that black card.
They head for turn 1, and Earnhardt says, okay, it's my turn. Up turn 1, and here he goes. Rudd goes around. Earnhardt is on the brakes, Bodine's on the brakes, and Rudd is spun.
When you looked up in the mirror and you saw Earnhardt back there, oh, no, not Earnhardt. He hit you. You got rattled because you knew if you didn't get out of the way quick enough, you were going to get hit.
When you looked in your mirror and you saw the black 3, it took your focus off because you knew that everything that happened was not an accident.
From time to time, he'd come real close to hurting not only himself, but a lot of other people.
At Bristol one time, he was behind me and his car was tore up a little bit, been in a wreck. And I looked up in the mirror and I went, I ain't gonna have no part of this. I'm gonna be in the way, and then I'll be victim if I don't get out of the way.
There was nothing that you did not expect. Sometimes it meant just putting a move on you that you just shook your head at and you go, oh man, I just got taken to school. Or, you know, bang!
We're on to Winston over at Charlotte. He slams me into the wall, broke my ribs and broke my shoulder and about knocked me out. He said, I thought you would have backed off and given me room because you were on the outside. And don't ever get on the outside of me again.
From his first victory at Bristol, Tennessee in 1979 to his last at Talladega, Alabama in 2000, Dale Earnhardt collected 76 checkered flags, 6th all-time, and 7 Winston Cup titles. No driver ever competed with a greater passion for risk.
Earnhardt told me one day, my greatest love is just to be right in there racing, just side by side with that guy, just lap after lap after lap. He gets an inch ahead of me and I get back an inch ahead of him. I just love to race that guy.
He'd just bump you every once in a while to see if you were alert. And then you see Earnhardt next week, you put his arm around your shoulder, you go off talking a little bit and you go, well, he really didn't mean to do that. Sure enough, about the second lap into the next race, boom, he turned you sideways again to look over at you and grin.
He was testing you. He wanted to see what you're made of. You know, how tough can you be? Let's see, right here, right now.
The Ford Thunderbird in '81 was a shoebox. And about the time I started to turn, the engine revved. He had driven up under the back of this Ford Thunderbird and lifted the rear tires off the ground. Scared me to death.
As Earnhardt's nickname evolved with his driving skills, from ironhead to intimidator, his need to control everything around him remained as strong as his nerve.
He didn't really want to hear your opinions, and he wouldn't listen. If you did it his way, he was a happy camper, but if you didn't, he didn't want to be around you.
I hope you don't ask me something that I can't answer, because then you say, what the heck? You don't know about that? Why don't you know about that?
We'd hire a new young guy to come work with us, and Dale wouldn't even talk to him. He'd walk past him and almost knock him over, just to kind of set the tone.
When Dale Earnhardt was on the racetrack and you were behind him, he was telling you where to go. I mean, he would drive with that one hand up there directing you all the time.
My first race car, Dale Earnhardt sponsored. So Dale come to me right before the race. He said, here's the deal. If I find you wrecked on this racetrack, I'm going to stop my car and kick your you-know-what.
I would be in those pits during that race, and I would say, all right, Dale, we're going to pit in 3 laps. I'm going to do 2 tires. Nope, I'm coming in, and I'm not leaving till you give me 4.
I'm driving. He's sitting behind me. I turn right. What'd you turn right for? Turn around and go back the other way. Make a U-turn right here. Turn around right here, right here, right here. Turn right behind that red car. Watch that black car. I said, what is this guy's problem? I just pulled over and said, you drive.
We went on a trip and we're walking down the beach, and I says, Earnhardt, even when you're walking, you still want to be walking faster than me. So we're going down the beach, the 2 of us, almost in a trot.
Dale, through much of his life, was like a mischievous little boy. He really was. He would do things that were outrageous.
But what may have begun as mischief became black comedy as an atmosphere of danger played out under the guise of humor surrounded Earnhardt.
I had a race car at the Speedway, and he said, you're not going in the first turn just right. Let me show you how to do that. He went wide open down the pit road. No helmet, nothing. There's no seat. I'm just bouncing off the floor pan. And we ran about 2 laps, and he was looking over me, grinning,
I was offered an opportunity to test one of the IROC Camaros. This other car loomed up, and it center punched me. Just boom. Oh, it's Earnhardt. And we finally came into the pits. He leaned in, put his arms on the side of the car, and said, that's pretty good. Walked off.
There'd been a racing-related dinner, and after the dinner, I had a new little convertible riding through the soft South Carolina night back toward the motel. Richard Childress was driving this big old Cadillac. They had pulled within inches of me. Earnhardt leans out the window, and all of a sudden, something grabbed me by the neck. He was cackling like a devil. Can you imagine something grabbing you by the neck and you're doing 45, 50 miles an hour? I had to pull over and stop. It took me 10 minutes to regain my composure.
Our pit reporters from ESPN would do interviews with him, and the camera only shoots from the waist up. Earnhardt would be stepping on the toes of the pit reporter as hard as he possibly could during the interview, trying to get them to brake. And he would wear heavy steel-toed boots just for the purpose.
If you were in your rental car leaving the track and he was behind you, I guarantee he was going to hit you.
My former wife and young daughter were driving, and all of a sudden something hit them from behind, and they looked in the rearview mirror, and all they saw were these dark sunglasses, a mustache, and a huge smile.
Kannapolis, North Carolina was totally a mill town because it was just centered around Cannon Mills. Wasn't a whole lot else to do if you didn't work in the mill. I'm sure that that's a lot of what Dale's saying, I don't want to go that route.
If it weren't for stock car racing, Dale Earnhardt would be punching a clock in a textile mill in Kannapolis.
He was born on April 29, 1951, the third of 5 children to Ralph and Martha Earnhardt. It wasn't long before Dale began to share his father's fascination for stock car racing.
Ralph Earnhardt was one of NASCAR's first race for a living race drivers.
His dad sort of chased prize money. If there was a good purse at a dirt track race here, he'd be there.
It was a time when racing celebrated the genius of the people that built the cars and the ability of the guys that drove them. In the case of Ralph Earnhardt, he possessed both qualities.
There was a part on all the cars that kept breaking, and Ralph had somehow figured out that if you bought a Craftsman screwdriver and cut off the two ends, you had the similar but a far stronger part. Other drivers found out, and they went in and they tried to buy this screwdriver. The guy said, there's some guy from Kannapolis comes down, buys every one I got.
On the dirt track circuit then, I mean, he was a guy to beat. Ralph Earnhardt was Dale Earnhardt.
And one thing I never tried to do was second guess Ralph, and that's the way Dale was.
He watched intently everything his daddy did, and he learned his style, he learned his demeanor.
Other young kids would come to the racetracks with their fathers, but they would be off kicking cans. Not Dale. Dale was right there with that car. He wanted to know what kind of springs it had in it, how much pressure was in the tires.
I knew everything going on. I'd stand up on top of the truck during the race and watch my dad race, and that's how I learned everything.
At 16, Dale dropped out of the 9th grade to work on his father's race cars. Soon, the Earnhardts were competing on the same dirt tracks.
Dale told me he'd win the race, and Ralph would make him take that car apart. And it's like, Daddy, why have I got to do that? I just won the race. And he said, because you're going to go back next week, and there's going to be somebody there that's going to be better.
He was really the guiding force in my life. Everything he ever said either came true or was the way to do it in the end after you made all the mistakes. Well, if I did it the way Dad said do it, it would have worked out okay.
That voice of wisdom was silenced in September of 1973 when Ralph Earnhardt died of a heart attack while working in his garage. Dale, at 22, was devastated.
It's one thing when somebody's in the hospital and they're sick and you expect something to happen. But when people's going about their everyday life, you know, when something like that happens, you don't expect it, and it's such a shock.
So you've lost somebody that it was going to help you get through those tough years of the early 20s. So it did have a real traumatic effect on him.
He used to go back to that garage in Kannapolis late at night, and he swore that he talked to his father about his fears, about how things were going on the racetrack.
Dale drew his love of hunting and fishing from his father, who was a great outdoorsman, and Ralph Earnhardt had some fine bird dogs. Dale said they just reminded him too much of his father, so he sold the bird dogs.
There was times when he would get into a story about his father, and big old tears would roll down his face, and he would wipe them away, and he says, I don't guess I should be this way, but I am, I'm human.
Dale was bound and determined that he was going to be better as a race driver than his father.
Ralph Earnhardt said, if you ever want to make it, boy, you got to get off this dirt. You need to get to asphalt.
I loved thinking about the first time I saw him carrying that bottle of Jack Daniels and that dirty t-shirt from racing on a dirt track.
He was a young wild man that took whatever he had and drove it as hard as it could go.
Earnhardt was standing there and he said, Buddy Baker, you know, if you and I ever go in the last corner with 2 or 3 laps to go, I'm gonna put your ass out.
We run Martinsville and we go down the first corner. He's done come down through pit road, cut the corner, run out in the grass, jumped the dadgum deal they had about a foot high there and landed on the hood of my car. Where's this guy think he's going? Gonna win the race in the first lap? I didn't care if he knocked himself out. I just didn't like him knocking me out.
I was deciding, well, man, do I need to just stop this stuff and go get a job and quit worrying about it? Didn't seem like we were going anywhere.
I didn't think he'd ever make it. I was watching him in Will Cronkite's car in Atlanta, and he turned over in the infield. I remember saying, if that kid ever makes it right there, the woods are full of them.
One of the defining moments was at Atlanta when he went over, knocked himself out, and he got out and he was looking for a ride by the end of the day.
He did not want to go back to the dirt tracks. He wanted to stay in NASCAR Winston Cup racing. Yeah, he was out of control, but desperate people will do desperate things.
Earnhardt was driving this short track piece of junk, running past all these high-dollar race cars. Osterlund said, I don't know who that kid is, but we got to hire him and put him in a race car.
It was the '79 season when Dale ran for Rookie of the Year, and Jake Elder great old, tough old, grizzled character. He says to Dale, "Stick with me, kid, and we'll both be wearing diamonds as big as horse turds."
Under the team owned by Rod Osterlund, diamonds seemed close enough to grasp as Earnhardt followed his Rookie of the Year campaign with a Winston Cup title in 1980. Then, after a series of bad breaks shadowed him for 3 seasons, Earnhardt found the right partner in 1984, and the road to victory opened up.
A couple of years ago, I've started building for this, and I think with the opportunity I've got with Wrangler and Dale right now, guy couldn't ask for a better combination.
I think it made a big difference in Dale's career that he teamed up with Richard Childress, who knew the driving side of it. He knew the mechanical side of it because he built and worked on his own race cars.
Over 17 seasons with Childress, Earnhardt won 6 more Winston Cups and finished out of the top 5 just 4 times. Yet for all his success, his competitiveness seemed to sharpen with the years.
Dale Earnhardt understood that the sport he was in involved conflict. And conflict requires a guy in a white hat and a guy in a black hat. And it was just as fine with him that it could be the guy in the black hat.
Dale said one time that he missed being booed because he said, when they boo me on Sunday, I go to the bank on Monday.
There were some of the really top guys at the time that were afraid to let him run close to them.
They were literally scared of him. I mean, it'd be a lot like a guy walking around with a loaded gun. Well, that's what you never knew about Earnhardt, if he had another bullet in the chamber or not. But you knew one thing, if he did, he was going to use it.
And he did some things that a lot of other drivers wouldn't do, but probably wish they could do and get away with it.
I always told him, I said, man, you got more car control than anybody's ever sat behind the wheel on one of these things. Why do you have to run over people? And he would just grin. That's who he was.
And we have a crash. It's Richard Petty on the main straightaway. Petty bangs the wall right at the start-finish line.
Anytime you get close to racing with Earnhardt, you're in trouble, and I wasn't smart enough to get out of his way.
I hate it happening because, he's running real strong and everything, but, it's just breaks of the game.
All he knew was just run it wide open, and somebody got in the way. That was just tough.
Sounds happy. Now Waltrip on the inside.
Oh! Earnhardt came down, caught the right rear of Darrell's car.
When he hooked me at Richmond, that was an old dirt track move. When you go by on the inside and the guy eases into your right rear quarter panel and it turns you straight into the fence. He knew what he was doing.
Dale Earnhardt, what was your view on what happened in that accident?
Just hung up with old Darrell. We got in the wall.
I haven't been in any run-ins with Earnhardt. Everybody else has. He's not choosy,
When you know somebody will wreck you to win a race and they flaunt it, then that's stepping over the line.
There is Dale Earnhardt moving underneath Kyle Petty. Now, there's a little jiggle right there. There goes Kyle.
Earnhardt knocked the trash out of me in the rear, spun me going in straight. I don't know where he thinks this is.
This one driver said, I went into this race, so one thing I was going to do, I was going to get even with Dale Earnhardt. And twice during the race, I had him just right in my sights, and you know what? Before I could cut the steering wheel, the son of a gun was gone.
We were talking about how to revamp the point system. One time I said, I know a good way. We could add 10 bonus points for anybody who took out Earnhardt. And everybody agreed. They thought that was a great idea.
There were a few of those that wanted to go to NASCAR and have NASCAR put some sort of restraint on him.
Rod is inside of Dale Earnhardt as they go into turn number 1, and both of them spin.
I got on the inside of him. I felt like he came down on me. I don't know. All I know is we got together. I hated that happening.
How will this affect your championship view from here on? You got 3 more to go.
What do you think? They ought to find that son of a bitch, make him sit out the rest of the year, I think.
I kind of viewed him as like a little puppy. If the puppy pees in the floor when he's a week old and you whoop him with a newspaper, you maybe can get his attention. But if you let him pee in the floor for a year, and then all of a sudden then you want to try to whip him with a newspaper, he's looking at you like, what's the deal here?
Terry Labonte takes the lead. Here comes Earnhardt. He hits Labonte. Labonte spins in turn 2. Ricky Rudd crashes into him.
I wasn't going to wreck him, but I got to him and he turned him around. So didn't mean to really turn around, meant to rattle his cage over.
Dale said in victory lane that he didn't mean to spin you out, he just meant to nudge you.
Have you ever heard him say he means to spin anybody out? Okay.
You could say whatever you wanted to about him. He was a bad guy, that he was a left driver. Didn't bother him. Right in the middle of the worst possible thing, he could smile, and with that smile, you knew that he was still tougher than you.
Despite the cries of foul play, Earnhardt kept winning, and in 1994 tied Richard Petty's record of 7 Winston Cups.
The championships that Dale won were much harder to win than ones that Richard won. Competition was keener and probably a little tougher when Dale won his.
Dale won 7 championships, but he never won any of them by going out and just trying to stay out of trouble and riding around and getting points. I mean, he went out in every race like it was the last one.
The more that you followed the sport, the more important that Daytona becomes. It wasn't Daytona Beach, it was going to the beach. That's going to take your race car to Daytona International Speedway.
It's always been the biggest paying race. So it was the first race to be nationally televised. First. And to be who he was and never have won the Daytona 500 would have crushed it.
Dale Earnhardt and Daytona International Speedway's 2.5-mile track were inextricably bound. He first raced a Winston Cup car there in 1978. Over the next 23 years, he won 34 different events at Daytona.
He told me that Daytona was like a second home to him. He came down here as a kid with a bunch of friends, and they had a couple bucks, and they were running in the sportsman race. And he just took a shining to the track right from the first time he got on the track.
5 times in the 1980s, Earnhardt had a good chance to win the 500, but was denied victory. Nothing, however, could have prepared him for the bad luck he suffered in 1990.
One point in the race there, we had a 40-second lead, and that just doesn't happen. It's just a matter of running the laps out, and everybody knew it.
Earnhardt now stretching his lead by another car length over Cope. Earnhardt's car blows up. Earnhardt blows a tire in turn number 3.
What on earth happened? A car had blown up well in front of him, and a piece of the bell housing went through his tire.
He actually turned his back on everybody for like 5 minutes to gather his emotions and his thoughts. I've never seen him do that before.
Just a quarter of a lap away from victory. Much you could do better.
Earnhardt had the tire saved. They shined it up and mounted the tire over the door as a reminder of how close they had come.
Twice in the 1990s, Earnhardt was beaten in the Daytona 500 by a Dale of a different stripe.
Here comes Jarrett to the inside to try to lead the Daytona 500.
Here they come off turn number 4. Dale Jarrett's got the lead. He goes to the inside. Earnhardt's not going to get him. Dale Jarrett is going to win the Daytona 500.
I don't believe it.
I ain't never won the Daytona 500.
And you still ain't.
I ain't going to Disney World either.
Everybody's shuffling to the inside.
Here is Earnhardt looking low off 4. Jarrett blocks. Earnhardt looks wide. Jarrett is there. Coming to the line, the winner of the 38th Daytona 500 is Dale Jarrett. Dale Earnhardt will finish second.
Unbelievable.
Daytona, ain't it?
I mean, I just can't believe it. You get in this situation so many times and still can't win.
Well, we just didn't have it. Them Fords has got it. We ain't.
In 1997, Earnhardt was again in contention at the Daytona 500, battling Jeff Gordon in the final laps.
We were actually leading the race with about 15 laps to go, and I remember walking to Richard Childress in the pits, and I said, "What do you think?" He said, "Been here too many times before, way too early to tell."
They're about 2/3 Wall lap jump behind. from the back straightaway. Dale Earnhardt is into the wall. Looked as though he was tapped by Dale Jarrett coming off the corner. Racing side by side. Earnhardt hit the outside wall hard.
He's turned around, sat in the back of the ambulance, and the tow truck guys put his car on the hook. And he says, "You know, those wheels are still straight. See if the car will fire up."
Just out of the corner of my eye, I see a black car go down pit road. It's like, no. He went back out there and we finished that race. He did not want to have a DNF in that Daytona 500.
Much like a wild horse that threw you off and you kept getting back on it until you finally became friends. I think Dale Earnhardt and Daytona International Speedway were friends, but there was a path to get there.
By 98, he had not won a whole lot of races for the past few years. And there were people beginning to ask the question, is Earnhardt through? Is he washed up?
I think that the universal feeling of everybody was Daytona owed Dale Earnhardt a victory.
Then a small, shiny charm was introduced into the 46-year-old Earnhardt's legacy of 19 straight losses at the Daytona 500.
There was this little girl he met, and she gave him a penny. This little handicapped girl. She said, "This will be your good luck charm to win the Daytona 500.
I'm standing in the garage waiting on Dale, and it's like, where's he at? He comes running back to the garage, it's like, where have you been? Don't bother me for a minute. Give me some yellow glue. I'm wanting to talk to him about his race car, and he's worried about gluing a penny on the dash. And that's what we started that Daytona 500.
And Dale Earnhardt is going to win the Daytona 500 in his 20th try, finally eluding the one prize in NASCAR racing that has eluded him the most over his illustrious career.
It was a rather dramatic moment in sports because every crewman lined up and shook hands with him coming down pit road.
It was the ultimate sign of respect because there were a lot of those guys that felt that Dale had gone a little bit too far in his competitiveness early on, but they still could give him a really sincere compliment.
There was not a person in that garage area that didn't just say, man, that guy has deserved it.
Man, can you believe it? For one, got an awesome race car, but for two, thank good Lord for a good day.
It was about 11 o'clock at night, and we're sitting there in a little portable studio, and right behind our window stops this motorcycle with this policeman on the front and Dale Earnhardt on the back, still in his fire suit, and he looks in his window with both hands in the air. He says, "I won the Daytona 500."
I called him the next day and talked to him. I could see that this really, he had gained a victory over something that had really, really bothered him for a long period of time.
He obviously had a love for this sport and a passion to succeed. There was some human cost there.
He married at an early age, but he was trying to make a living driving a race car. And he worked.
I remember Dale told me, my daddy said, never, ever take food off the table to race. But whatever else you have to do, you do.
Earnhardt, when he first started racing, many times would borrow money on Thursday to buy tires to race on the weekend, knowing that if he didn't win the race, he wouldn't have enough money to pay people back on Monday. Well, that's pressure.
When he won his first Winston Cup points title in 1980, Dale Earnhardt had two failed marriages. The first, at age 17, produced a son, Kerry, and the second produced a daughter, Kelly, and another son, Dale Jr.
He tried to summarize his life like all I ever wanted to do was race, and I was not very lucky in two previous marriages because racing was more important to me than anything else in the world.
We talked about Dale and Dale Jr. and their relationship, and he was very candid about how he had not had that much time for Dale Jr. and how he regretted that.
There was a certain tragedy to that because of the closeness that Dale had with Ralph Earnhardt, his dad.
Dale had always talked about the importance of school and had drummed it into Dale Jr. And when he graduated, he said, my dad wasn't there. I wanted to just get that diploma and shove it in his face.
It annoyed Dale Earnhardt to no end that his son stayed up till 3 o'clock in the morning playing on the computer and slept till noon when he wanted to. Dale Jr. knew that it annoyed his father, and therefore spent as much time as he could talking about it.
I thought at the time, I'm like, man, I'm always going to be his, Dale Earnhardt's son. I'm never going to, nobody's ever really going to call me by my name. I thought it was tough when he was alive. It was, being under his shadow, because he had a pretty big shadow.
One of the first races that Dale Earnhardt Jr. ever got to race against his father, Earnhardt whacked him. And I said, what in the world are you doing? And he went, let me tell you, he's going to win a lot of races, but I'm not giving him anything.
When Dale Earnhardt Jr. won the Richmond race, and here comes Big E running in by me, he leans down in his ear and he says, congratulations, I love you, find a way home.
When I was growing up, I watched everything he did, and I think I learned a lot just by kind of tuning in to what he was doing on the racetrack as much as I could. And when I would get out on the track, I would get in a situation, and it answered a lot of questions I had about why he did this or why he did that.
Ralph didn't get to see Dale Earnhardt become Dale Earnhardt. And I think that always was a huge hole in Dale's life. Fast forward 20 years to Dale getting to see his son, Dale Jr., become a winning Winston Cup driver.
I was there when Earnhardt Jr. won his first major race. Earnhardt walked in that winner's circle. He was the father. He opened that heart up to everybody, and you could see the pride that he had in his son.
What'd your dad say to you? He just told me he loved me. Makes Daddy happy. I spent 20 years of my life trying to make it as hard on him as I could, and so we turning it around and doing good for him.
People talk about how close he grew to his son. Forget that. His daughter, he melted around her. This intimidator stuff, man, no one who called him the intimidator ever met and got to know Dale Earnhardt, and that's the great marketing secret of Dale Earnhardt Incorporated. He was a softie. He was a sentimental fool.
Earnhardt's daughter, Taylor Nicole, was born in 1988, the only child of his third marriage to Teresa Houston.
He really got close with those kids. And Teresa, I think, was a major part of helping that happen.
Family became more important to him. His young daughter, I think he doted on her and paid attention to her. That he had time that he never spent with his other kids.
There was everybody's picture of Dale, and then there was Dale for real, you know, and he was really a compassionate person.
He was supposedly driving by a church and saw some kids trying to raise money to pave the parking lot. He wrote him a check. He said, if I find out you told people who gave this money, if I see it in the newspaper, I'll send somebody over here with a bulldozer and tear your parking lot up.
He goes to a car dealership in Kannapolis, and he goes over and says, you don't know me, but I really need a car to drive to Daytona. The guy says, look, I got an old beat up, car out here I'll let you just take. He turns around and walks back to the guy and says, someday I'm gonna make it, and when I do, I'm gonna remember you. Well, after Dale won a number of titles, he had an opportunity to buy a Chevrolet dealership. General Motors said, who's gonna run it? He says, I got a guy in mind. That's the guy he called back in Kannapolis.
This is the last middle of America mainstream white guy sport out there. The stars are the guys from the garage next door.
He once said, if you work in a shop all week, if you're doing ball joints, front ends, engine work, I want to be your guy. Come out to see me. I've done that job.
He loved to be on the farm. To relax, Earnhardt would clear land. He'd knock down trees. He'd just move the cattle around.
He knew that there was a Kannapolis, North Carolina in every state in the Union. I think he was ever mindful of his status. He didn't carry it beyond that.
If his country boy image endeared Dale Earnhardt to race fans, it was his business savvy that appealed to the corporate world.
Dale Earnhardt, when he first came up, was befriended by a fellow by the name of Joe Whitlock. Dale Earnhardt comes up and says, hey Joe, can you do me a favor? Can you teach me how to sign my autograph? I think I'm going to need to do that.
The NASCAR Ride-Along program puts you in the action.
Pepper really seems to be enjoying himself today. He might want to get his head back in the window. Here's that guy. Okay.
People wanted something with Dale Earnhardt's name on it, wanted a picture, a hat, a t-shirt. Hey, I want to be involved with that. It just got bigger and bigger.
That's where Teresa was able to help Dale the most, I believe, was she's a business person, taking the money that Dale made and parlaying it into bigger and better things.
The whole concept of driver marketing, Dale Earnhardt more or less invented it. He branded motor racing far before anybody else ever thought of it.
In 1980, Dale Earnhardt Incorporated was formed. Over the next 2 decades, its estimated value climbed to $100 million. He owned the trademark of his signature and called his headquarters the Garage Mahal. Sales of Earnhardt merchandise in 2000 reached $33 million.
This sport has turned into a big business, and Dale, he led the way on that and opened up a lot of doors, a lot of opportunities for a lot of people, me being one of them.
You look up in the grandstand and you see the sea of black, the black hats, the t-shirts, the Earnhardt banners, and you realize people that they just felt like he was a brother to them almost.
Saturday at Daytona, we've been talking about Dale was going to break my record for the Ironman streak. We're sitting there in his motorhome. He said, "That's if I make it that far." And everybody just laughed, you know. And that was Saturday.
Sunday morning, February 18, 2001, began the same way the previous 7 Daytona 500s had started for Dale Earnhardt, with an inspirational note of scripture provided by Darrell Waltrip's wife, Stevie.
The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous man will run to it and be safe. That was the scripture for that day for Dale. And he always would give me a hug. We always said we loved each other. That was how I said goodbye, although I didn't know I was saying goodbye.
Got a couple of corporate teammates, Waltrip and Earnhardt Jr. Then the man who owns those cars, Dale Earnhardt, he's running in third.
As the race wound down, Earnhardt kept the pack away from his team-owned cars.
It was a Dale Earnhardt we'd never seen. He was driving defensively. And obviously we'll never know how proud he was to look out that windshield and see 2 cars that he owned racing each other to win the Daytona 500.
Dale Earnhardt gets turned sideways. He'll take Schrader. Earnhardt and Schrader are in the wall. Waltrip leads off 4.
Coming down to the finish, finally, Michael Waltrip is going to win the Daytona 500, the biggest of them all.
Here comes my brother, and he's going to win the race. And wham, I look back, and I saw just the tail end of the wreck.
I noticed the people looking towards Dale's car. I could just tell something was wrong, and it was.
I kept looking over my shoulder, wondering when Dale was going to come grab me around the neck. You know, when that didn't happen, that began to put questions in my mind. Why isn't he here?
We watched other people hit the wall. I've hit the wall. You know, you walk away. So what really drew your attention to the deal that, hey, that they're still down there?
Just couldn't wait to go hug my brother, and instead I had to go to the hospital. And as soon as I walked in, I knew it was bad. Everybody was crying, and I found out that Dale didn't make it.
And then you get the news. I mean, went from the greatest day in my life to the worst day.
This is undoubtedly one of the toughest announcements that I've ever personally had to make. But after the accident in turn 4 at the end of the Daytona 500, we've lost Dale Earnhardt.
You realized what had happened and who we had lost, and the icon that he was became very apparent at that moment, not just internally, but throughout the world. You look at each other and say, okay, what do we do now?
We'll get through this. I'm sure he'd want us to keep going, so that's what we're going to do. It got hard because you had to talk about it all the time, and people wanted to know what you were thinking or what you were feeling. Everybody wanted to pick you apart, so that was kind of, it sucked.
I was just floored. This couldn't happen to this man. You know, there was no way that he was going to die in a race car.
Earnhardt reportedly hit the wall at 160 miles per hour. The official cause of his death was listed as a basilar skull fracture. The racing world was locked in denial.
It's hard to realize that so many people will be affected.
It brought tears to my eyes just thinking that he's not going to be able to hug his wife anymore and not going to be able to grab Dale Jr. by the neck. He's not going to be able to watch Taylor grow up.
It's been hard for me to accept that it's a reality. I mean, it's Dale Earnhardt. You know, it's a guy that thought I'd be racing against forever.
Hard to believe. You know, you thought that you were in a bad dream and you're going to wake up. You know, it's the way it was.
I'd gotten some baseball cards, and there's one of he and I. Out of habit, I signed my name real small over on my side, leaving him room to sign his name on his side. That's how hard it is to believe it. He's not around.
I miss my father, and I've cried for him, but out of my own selfish pity is the reason for those emotions. I just try to remember that he's in a better place.
Once he was gone, there's a lot of times where I need advice and I don't have him to give it to me, and I make mistakes. But it was tough to really focus on trying to drive.
On July 7th, not quite 5 months after Earnhardt's death, the NASCAR circuit returned to Daytona for the Pepsi 400. And through the pain of loss, Dale Jr. provided a finish worthy of his father.
Dale Earnhardt Jr. comes back to the Daytona International Speedway, leading the pack, coming to the line. He will win the Pepsi 400.
As soon as I crossed the finish line, I was kind of breaking up a little bit, about to fall apart. This is a lot bigger than I'll probably ever really imagine or ever really understand.
That was his daddy. A week before that, he walked his sister down the aisle and took his dad's place, giving his sister away in marriage. And that night, he took his dad's place at the head of the field as a winner at Daytona.
Every time I go to Daytona and walk into that place, I feel like I'm home, you know? And the fact that my dad lost his life there makes it even more important. I don't hold any ill wills or regrets or anything like that. And you think you would, but every time I go there, I get a good feeling.
Dale Earnhardt Jr. pulls down to the start-finish line. He will win the 46th running of the Daytona 500.
People have a funny way of deciding for themselves what a big story is going to be, and his death surprised a lot of people who didn't know the depth of affection for NASCAR in this country.
I never thought I would ever see a race driver on the cover of Time magazine, much less a NASCAR driver.
NASCAR now has to be prepared to defend its decisions and to be more public about its business.
We are not going to react just for the sake of reacting. And we're going to understand all the ramifications of a change before we make it.
After a 6-month investigation, NASCAR announced that Earnhardt's death was caused in part by a broken lap belt, although the belt manufacturer refuted the findings. In October 2001, the impact of the tragedy was felt again when NASCAR mandated that all drivers wear one of 2 approved head and neck restraint systems.
All of the drivers felt that Earnhardt was invincible. With Earnhardt's death, it made all of the drivers sit back and think that this could happen to me.
People are looking at things a lot differently than they used to because of Dale. That's going to be the biggest impact that Dale's accident had. Is going to make our sport safer.
When we lost Dale Earnhardt, there was a international energy, if you will, to making this sport safe. We've had that opportunity to seize, and we did, and we've made great strides since then.
Aside from mandating head restraints, NASCAR had outfitted nearly all its tracks with energy-absorbing barriers by 2004. Still in development is a safer, more spacious driver's compartment. Although there has not been another Nextel Cup fatality, the death of Dale Earnhardt still reverberates throughout the racing community.
Dale was still the villain from the past. When he's driving that black 3 car, he's a different kind of guy than he would be if you went up to his house. You could have some real quality time with him. And that's when he let his guard down a little bit. And that's when he was a human being. The rest of the time, he was an animal.
He's the guy on the New Jersey Turnpike in the big black Suburban right on your bumper. When you're in the outside lane, you're already going 20 miles an hour over the speed limit, and this guy's going 90. You're gonna move over. I mean, I don't care who you are.
And we were talking one day, and he said, you know, if I got killed on a racetrack, that would not be a tragedy. If I got killed in this truck driving to get a haircut one day, that would be a tragedy.
If somewhere back in the eons you asked him, you live a long time and be mediocre, or would you die young like your father and be great, he would choose dying young and being great every time.
In the messy aftermath of Earnhardt's death, a legal battle ensued over the right to view his autopsy photos. Teresa Earnhardt maintained that if the Volusia County Coroner's Office made the pictures public, they would distort our memory of the driver. In support of the Intimidator's widow, Florida Governor Jeb Bush signed into law the Earnhardt Family Protection Act on March 29, 2001, sealing the photos of one of racing's greatest drivers. For Sports Century, I'm Chris Fowler.